So let me just start off with this. I really liked The Last Jedi. In fact, when it came out, I had it as my second favorite Star Wars movie. But after seeing Rise of Skywalker, man, did The Last Jedi really screw up this trilogy. What a bummer. Let's just get to the review. What's up, everyone? Idaho here, and today I'm going to be doing a review for the new Star Wars movie, The Rise of Skywalker. And I know it's a couple weeks late. I was visiting family for the holidays, and I just barely got back in town, and I wanted to get this review out there because there was a lot that I liked about this movie, and sadly, a lot that I didn't like about this movie, and I wanted to get this out here and have a conversation, as always, with you guys. See what you guys like, see what you guys disliked about it, and try and figure out what in the world happened with this movie. Okay, so this movie was directed by J.J. Abrams, and for those of you who don't know, he was the one who directed The Force Awakens, which was the first of this sequel trilogy that they've come out with over the last couple years. And when The Force Awakens came out, I honestly really liked it. Yeah, it had some rehashing of Episode 4, but overall, I thought that it was really good. I thought that it set up a lot of really awesome storylines that they were going to cover over this new trilogy. I thought J.J. Abrams did a great job with that. And I was really looking forward to The Last Jedi. And like I said in my intro to this video, I really liked The Last Jedi, but it didn't really take anything that J.J. Abrams did in The Force Awakens and expound upon it. It honestly just basically took what J.J. Abrams did and threw away a lot of it and was like, actually, I'm going to go, my own direction. I'm going to go my own way with this trilogy. And so The Force Awakens was like a setup movie for the trilogy, and The Last Jedi also felt like a setup movie for this trilogy. And so the reason I say all that is The Rise of Skywalker, like I said, is directed by J.J. Abrams, who directed the first one. And man, most of this review that I'm going to do today is going to be talking about how I felt when The Force Awakens came out. J.J. Abrams had a path that he was trying to go on with this new trilogy. And then Rian Johnson came in to direct The Last Jedi, and he took it a different direction. And this whole Rise of Skywalker movie, especially maybe the first three-fourths of this movie, was just J.J. Abrams saying, dang it, okay, let me get this back on track. Let me go back and talk about what I wanted to do with this trilogy and try and squeeze it all into this movie. And guys, that's very apparent throughout this whole movie. So I know I probably started off very negative. Yes, there's going to be a lot of negative takes with this movie, a lot of confusion. But overall, I liked it. I'll just get that out of the way. I'll probably score it at the end of this video for sure. But I like this video, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of awesome things that happened in this movie. A lot of times that I literally, pumped my fist and I was like, yes, that's Star Wars. I love this. There was, times where, one time where I teared up because I got all emotional. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. And, but sadly, there was just a lot of times where I was watching the movie, scratching my head thinking, what in the world? That doesn't even make sense. So I'm just going to go through and break down some of my key parts from this movie. As you can imagine, there's going to be a lot of spoilers in this review. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, please go to the movie theater, watch it, come back, check out this video, and let's discuss it in the comment section. So let's just get this sucker started then. Let's just bust out a spoiler. Rey's a Palpatine, right? Yeah, so that's that. Okay, yeah, we're good. All right, well, thank you, JJ. We finally figured out who her parents are. Okay. Okay, but in all seriousness, we'll talk about Rey being a Palpatine a little bit later. I want to start off by talking about the characters in this movie, because the characters were great for the story that was written for them. Rey, Poe, Finn, Kylo Ren, Lando, all these different characters really killed it in this movie. It's always fun watching these guys interact, and I'm so happy in this movie that they were all together for most of the movie. Because in The Last Jedi, Rey was kind of off doing her own thing with Luke. Finn was off going to the casino with that girl for most of the movie. Poe was stuck in the ship, just kind of not really doing much with Leia during The Last Jedi. I really felt like JJ was like, let's just get them all together in this movie. Let's see them interact. That's what I want them to do, just like Luke, Leia, and Han did in the original trilogy. And I really enjoyed that. I felt like Daisy Ridley, Oscar Isaac, John Boyega, all those guys, Adam Driver for Kylo Ren. They were great in this movie. Their performances were fantastic, and I was really happy with them. And this movie started off with Kylo Ren just absolutely wrecking face in the forest. And Kylo Ren is probably my favorite Star Wars character of all time. Easily my favorite character in this new trilogy. And I don't know why, I just gravitate towards him. I think he's a really interesting character, but this movie starts off with him in the forest looking for this Sith GPS thing, I'll call it. And it just starts jumping places. And it honestly reminded me a lot of Batman vs. Superman, for those of you that have seen that and you can remember what that was. It was like Kylo Ren fighting in the forest, finds this GPS thing, jumps to him flying through this random red goo in space. Boom, lands on a different planet, and now he's talking to the Emperor. Boom, cuts to Rey. You see what I'm saying? And I felt like that was pretty common with a lot of my friends and family that I talked to. The beginning of the movie was very jumpy. And that's one thing I heard in the early reviews that were coming out, was that the beginning of this movie was tough to watch. In my opinion, I still enjoyed it. I thought that it was good, but it was very fast-paced. And you'd be like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, I'm starting to feel this scene. It's pretty cool. I want to see what happens. Boom, and then it switches. One of the parts of the beginning of this movie where Kylo is actually traveling to this Sith planet, I thought that was done really well. When he first lands and he's walking in with this lightsaber, it's this big, ominous structure just sitting on this desolate planet with all these lightning strikes happening all over the place. I thought that was pretty cool. It set the tone pretty early. He goes down, and all of a sudden you hear Emperor Palpatine talking to him through his mind, saying he's every voice he's ever heard. You hear Vader, different things like that. And then he goes through and he reveals he was the one that created Snoke. This was one of the things that I was hoping they would answer in this movie, because I hated how they handled Snoke in The Last Jedi. He showed up in The Force Awakens with this really interesting character model, I guess you could say. He had like these scars all over his face. He was beat up, and his face just told a story itself. And I wanted to know where that came from. I wanted to know, where was he this whole time? And then when he just died abruptly in The Last Jedi, which that scene was actually pretty sweet, by the way, that lightsaber scene with Kylo and Rey, one of my favorites of all time in Star Wars. But when he dies just abruptly right there, I remember looking at my buddy and I was like, so are they not ever going to talk about where Snoke came from? And in this movie, I'm glad they actually did. Was it the best? That's debatable. But it basically is revealed that Emperor Palpatine's been pulling the strings since the end of Episode 6. He's been slowly manipulating the First Order, and he created Snoke. And you see that giant container with like 3 different Snokes in it. And I guess that's why he's so disfigured, or they did that on purpose, was because the cloning process is messy. I don't know. That's just something I read online, and I guess, that makes a little bit more sense. When it actually gets to the reveal of Emperor Palpatine, he looked pretty dope. Like, he was just pale-skinned. His eyes were pure white, and his hands were all decrepit, and bones were sticking out, and it was just nasty. I thought he looked awesome. After Kylo Ren, we then flash to Rey meditating in this forest. And I don't know about you guys, but you could kind of see the rocks floating around her in this cool like pattern. Okay, off topic here really quick. When she was floating in the air and she had those rocks circling around her body like that, it kind of reminded me of Avatar: The Last Airbender when he was in his avatar state and the elements were floating around him. Did anyone else think that? Was that just me? Okay, just me? All right. Oh, okay. Oh, back to the review then. Anyway, so we see Rey floating in the air, and this whole part of the movie with her and Leia, I thought was great. I thought how they handled Leia with Carrie Fisher dying in this movie, they did a great job. You could sometimes see that she was CGI. Obviously, it wasn't actually her. So something interesting that I actually heard was that when Carrie Fisher was filming The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, different scenes that she filmed that didn't make the final cut of those movies is what they used for this movie. So something that she may have filmed for The Force Awakens, they took her and put her in this movie through CGI, obviously. And that's how they were able to implement her into this movie, which I thought was pretty good. And I skipped it in the beginning. Before it actually cuts to Rey, I think it actually goes to Finn and Poe and the Millennium Falcon going and getting that information from the spy. Which, let's talk about that. Who else called that the spy was General Hux from the beginning when they first said that in the movie? I know I did. When they're like, there's a spy in the First Order, I was like, oh, it's probably General Hux. And then when they go through in that first board meeting and Kylo Ren says he senses unease from Hux, you're like, okay, he's the spy. Okay, and then here's just another quick rant. Talk about a waste of a character, in my opinion, with General Hux. In the first movie, The Force Awakens, he comes out, and to me, he was kind of intimidating. He has that very passionate speech on Starkiller Base where he's just like yelling and screaming, and it's just super intense. And then I felt like in The Last Jedi, they just made him the butt of all the jokes. And so in this movie, JJ was just like, okay, yeah, we gotta, like, let's just get rid of him because no one takes him seriously anymore. And that was so frustrating for me because he was kind of an integral character from the beginning. And this one, maybe halfway through the movie, they just shot him and killed him. And anyway, that was just a bummer to me. Okay, so let's go back to Poe and Finn. In that opening part with them, their light speed skipping to get away from the TIE fighters, that part was a little confusing for me as well because how were the TIE fighters tracking them through light speed? Was it because of the technology that they had from The Last Jedi where they could track them through light speed? Or was it because they were light speed skipping that they could just follow them? I don't know. That was another part. I was like, how are these guys following them through light speed? But again, just another one of those things I was watching and I was like, that doesn't make much sense. So when they actually get back to the base where Rey and Leia are at, and you get this cool interaction between Poe blaming Rey for BB-8 and Rey blaming Poe for the Millennium Falcon, and how both of them are all, damaged, and Finn's in the middle, kind of like being the middleman, saying, like, you're trying to break him up. I loved that. That was one of my favorite parts of this movie. Like what I said in the beginning of this review, I am so happy that JJ brought all these characters together and kept them together throughout this movie so that we could see these cool character moments, with them interacting. So after they all meet up and figure out they need to get this Sith GPS thing so they can get to this planet, they go to this planet, I can't remember what the name was, where they're having this big party. And it's where we run into Lando. And Lando was also another character that I really enjoyed in this. He didn't have, too much of a role in the movie. He had a couple lines here and there, but when he was in there, he was great. And he is just so entertaining to watch, and his interaction with Rey and Chewie and different things, he was great. I thought how they handled Lando in this movie was awesome. So after they get the information from Lando and they're escaping the stormtroopers on those speeder bike things, and there's those two stormtroopers flying through the air, I really like that part. It reminded me a lot of the pod racing scene from episode 1, how they're zipping through the canyons. I thought that was really well done. But then when they get to the sinking fields and, they've killed all the stormtroopers and they're actually sinking down, this was just another one of those scenes in this movie that did not make any sense to me and was extremely frustrating. As they're sinking down, Finn looks at Rey and says, "Rey, hold on, I never told you something," and they fall down. You never get to hear what he says. Then they fall down, and then Rey's like, "What were you going to tell me?" "Oh, nothing. Don't worry about it." And Poe's like, "You keep secrets." It was kind of funny. But they hinted at it a couple more times in the movie. They never said what Finn wanted to say to Rey. It was just something that they kept hinting at, like almost foreshadowing, and then there was nothing that happened at the end of the movie. Now, I've heard people say, oh, he was going to tell her that he loved her, or, that he cared about her, by how he acted throughout the movie, that, he had feelings for her. Then there's been other people that have come out and said, no, he was going to tell her that he's force sensitive. Oh my gosh, let's not even get started on that, the force sensitive thing. Actually, we will. We'll just talk about it a little bit later. So anyway, that was just, it was so dumb. They just kept bringing it up, and then there was no payoff to it. They never actually answered the question with what was he trying to say. Once they actually land down in the tunnel and you hear Poe yelling through to make sure everyone's okay except for C-3PO, and then C-3PO stands up and is like, "You didn't say my name, sir, but it's fine. I'm okay." That you could tell they used C-3PO in this movie for the comedic relief, and overall I thought he did a great job with it. Okay, so the reason I think they came out with the episode of The Mandalorian right before this movie came out was for this next section. And the reason I say that is when they're going through the tunnel, they find the blade, different things like that. That giant serpent appears, and it looks like, he's about to attack him. But then Rey goes over there and heals the snake with the Force. Now, I have never seen that in a Star Wars movie. I know that it's in the video games. It's probably in the TV shows. But actually in the movies, we've never seen the Force heal something like that. But in The Mandalorian, that week, they came out with an episode where Yoda heals that guy with the Force and, puts the scars all back together, different things like that. So I feel like they put that episode of The Mandalorian in first. So they were like, okay, just so you know, Jedi can heal really, really bad wounds with the Force. So just be aware of that. And then when Rise of Skywalker came out, you see Rey a couple times in this movie heal someone with really bad wounds. And I feel like that was another thing I really enjoyed with this, is the Force was powerful in this movie. I feel like in the original trilogy, Palpatine with the lightning fingers and Yoda lifting the X-Wing out of the swamp, those were really cool, but there wasn't anything too big with the Force, I feel like, in the original trilogy. Then in the prequel trilogy, episodes 1 through 3, I felt like there was a little bit more, not really, but you just haven't really seen super powerful Force powers. In the games, there's people that just, in the games, there's characters that can pull down entire Star Destroyers out of the sky with the Force. And we've never seen that in the movies. And in this one, I feel like we hinted at that a little bit more. And I really enjoyed that. Okay, really quick. And this was another part of this movie that just annoyed me. And it's small. It's not anything significant. But you have that epic part of the movie where Kylo is chasing Rey in the TIE Fighter. Which one... Why was he chasing her in the TIE Fighter? He didn't shoot at her when she was right in front of him. Was he trying to run her over? Like, that whole part just didn't make any sense why he was chasing her down like that. Then she cuts off the wing for the TIE Fighter. And then this sucker gets cut, and the middle portion, the ball portion of the TIE Fighter, rolls like 40 or 50 times. And you're like, dang, how's he going to survive that? How are they going to make it so that he walks out of that thing alive? And then to add on top of the 40 or 50 rolls that this thing is doing, it has this huge explosion at the end. And I remember looking around and one of my buddies was like, oh, he's dead. And I was thinking, yeah, he's got to be dead. And then he just walks out. Not like a scratch on him. Nothing's wrong with his clothes. He's not wearing his helmet. It was just a dumb Hollywood moment that I felt kind of took away from that scene almost a little bit. That could have been just me. I don't know. You guys let me know what you think. So as Rey is pulling this ship down out of the sky with the Force, which in the theater, that was one of those moments when she first grabbed it, I was like, oh crap. Rey is powerful, and she was extremely powerful in this movie. She's pulling it down, trying to keep the shuttle from getting away. Kylo comes out. They're kind of doing this tug-of-war thing with the ship. And then Rey just rages and boom, shoots lightning out of her fingers and hits the ship. And it explodes and we all think Chewie dies. Everyone in the theater was just like, whoa, what the heck just happened? Okay, quick side note here. I thought for sure after The Force Awakens that they were going to have Rey turn evil and join Snoke at that time and have Kylo join Luke and turn good in the second movie of this trilogy. They obviously didn't do that, but when she shoots that lightning out of her fingers in this and how they kind of handled her throughout the rest of the movie with her slowly turning, it felt like, to the dark side was pretty cool. And I think if they would have ended it actually with Rey becoming the new Empress and her being super powerful with all the Sith in her, and then you have Kylo turning good in the end, and then having Luke and his mom and the rest of the Jedi behind him, and that was the final battle. To me, I think that would have been a lot more epic than how this one ended. But anyway, okay, let's get back on track to what we were talking about before. I felt like after Rey zapped that ship with the lightning fingers, this movie really started to take off. Well, I guess maybe not this next planet where they go, where Poe takes them to this planet where he's had obviously past relationships. Here he used to be a spice runner. That part of the movie kind of slowed down a little bit, but you had Babu Frick in it, that little tiny guy. He was super cute. He was hilarious. You had that cool scene with C-3PO where he says, I'm taking one last look at my friends. I thought that was interesting. I felt like that romance hint thing that they had with Poe and that other girl was kind of a waste. Yeah, it was funny how they handled it, but again, it was one of those that I felt was kind of forced when they were escaping, and he's like, "Can I kiss you?" And she's like, "No." And he's like, "Okay." And then at the end of the movie, after everyone's died and they're celebrating, and he looks over her like, "Hey, you wanna, come over here?" And she goes, that was funny, but again, what was really the point of that? Just basically to say eventually they're going to get together? I don't know. Another one of those dumb moments for me that I didn't really think was necessary or add to the story. So that whole planet thing right there with Babu Frick and trying to get the clue, it was okay, but it really just led to them getting on to Kylo Ren's Star Destroyer and trying to break Chewie out. I thought that was really cool. Okay, here. Dang it. Okay, guys. Another one of those moments in this movie that I rolled my eyes and I was like, this is Hollywood. This is stupid, though. When they're running through the hallways with the guns, they are literally running in the middle of the hallway, shooting people, and there's stormtroopers all over the place, and no one can shoot them. Like, yeah, they took cover a couple times, but that scene where they're just running down the hallway and you see blaster bolts flying to the side of them, it was super cheesy. And yeah, I know Poe gets clipped in the arm, but it was another dumb part of this movie. Hopefully you guys are seeing what I think about this movie. There was a lot of really good parts, but I felt like whenever there was a good part in this movie, something happened immediately afterwards that took away from that and made me just think that was dumb. Why is that in this movie? And them going through and escaping, that was one part. Even though that part was really cheesy, it did eventually transition to the point where you had that awesome interaction between Kylo and Rey. First inside of Kylo's quarters where they're having that lightsaber fight inside of Kylo's room, and then it eventually leads to them going to the hangar, discussing Rey's parents. And there's just something about Rey and Kylo's relationship that I just gravitate towards it. They do it so well, how they have that connection. And once Kylo just starts explaining how both of their families eventually just lead to the dark side, it's a part of who they are. I love how Daisy Ridley acts that scene because you can see the anger start to build up as she starts to think about how her parents were murdered by Emperor Palpatine to try and get to her. And I thought that it was pretty cool. And again, you could see how it slowly shows how Rey is fading towards the dark side and starting to move with more anger, more hate, and emotion. After that scene, they eventually go back to the Endor system where the Death Star remains are at, because that's where the clue was taking them. And that was cool. How it was set up. This movie was so beautiful how it was shot, with the Death Star wreckage out in the background and those massive waves crashing in. It was pretty cool. And this is where we see Finn run into a bunch of other former stormtroopers who deserted from their post and have been living on this Endor system. Again, this was just another one of those story beats from this movie that I did not understand. Because in The Force Awakens, you could kind of see, I guess, that Finn was Force sensitive with how he was able to fight with the lightsaber. The Last Jedi, they completely, I felt like, ignored Finn, and there was no sense that he was Force sensitive at all. And then in this movie, JJ just really pounded it, I feel like, multiple times that, hey, Finn is Force sensitive. And they didn't do anything with it. If they would have had Finn say, yeah, I'm Force sensitive, I understand these, I can understand what's going on, and then maybe at the end he comes in to help fight with the lightsaber, that would have been epic. But again, it was one of those things where they just hinted at it, showed a couple of experiences with him feeling the Force or using the Force, and then nothing. Nothing is revisited later on. And that's why I feel like it is, when he tells Rey, I need to tell you something, I feel like that's what he was going to tell her, but he never does. And sadly, again, nothing comes of it, which I wish they would have done something like that. All right, now let's jump into my favorite part of this movie. When Rey takes this boat out to the wreckage of the Death Star, and she's climbing up, which reminded me a lot of the first movie of this trilogy, when she's climbing through that old ship scavenging. When she's climbing up this Death Star to get to this vault, you walk into the room where the Emperor used to sit in Episode 6, when Luke is fighting Vader. And that music plays that happened in the movie. It was a really cool fan servicey moment at that point in the movie. This movie had a lot of fan service to the previous Star Wars movies, which I feel like most of them hit. I feel like sometimes that can be a detriment to these kind of movies. This was another one of those that I feel like they played it It made sense. And I thought it was pretty cool. She walks into this room, the vault, to try and get this Sith GPS thing. And she has a vision of her being evil. And she has that cool lightsaber thing that switches out. And again, we're all just thinking, okay, she's probably going to turn to the dark side at the end, or there's a good chance she could. Where is this going? She walks out, she runs into Kylo Ren. Again, this interaction with Kylo Ren and their lightsaber fight was epic. How they were flipping through stuff. You could just see the emotion when they're fighting. I love watching Rey use a lightsaber because I feel like when most other people use a lightsaber, they're stone-faced, just kind of twirling, flipping around. She's like yelling, grunting, doing flips. Like she just... The emotion that she portrays as Rey is cool. But another bummer, again, so you have this epic lightsaber fight and this really cool interaction between those two. And then at the end of this fight, I don't know if Rey just got tired because she just drops down on one knee. I'm guessing maybe she hasn't been doing her sprints during her training. And Kylo is just, has a lot of stamina. But she basically just gives up in the end. And to me, that was kind of weird, but I guess I can understand. We've never really seen Jedi get super tired when they're fighting, like in Episode 3 with Obi-Wan and Anakin. They fight for like 30 minutes nonstop, flipping through lava and whatever. This one, they actually start to wear down, so I guess I could see that. But right when this fight ends, and Kylo is standing over Rey with his lightsaber, Leia goes through and has a moment where she doesn't say anything, she just walks back. And then someone else says, okay, this is what she has to do. Her one last-ditch effort that's going to take everything she has to reach her son. And right as Kylo is about to swing at Rey, Leia lays down and she calls out to him. And he just kind of pauses. And I wasn't sure what that was about. Like if she actually did something to him to change him. Or she was just distracting him. Or whatever. But it had to be something big because he stands there and he drops his lightsaber. You know what? Maybe he hasn't talked to her or felt her in a while, like felt her presence, and so this kind of shocked him, but at the same time, he did feel like he was close to her in The Last Jedi when he almost killed her inside of the ship. So I don't know. Either way, he drops the lightsaber, Rey picks it up and stabs Kylo in the chest. And then you see it flashes back to Leia, laying down, and she just dies. And I don't know, guys. Like, I'd like to go through and say, okay, maybe she died because Kylo got stabbed and she finished her job. I don't know. But eventually Rey figures out, okay, something happened with Leia. She dies. She takes a moment and Kylo's just sitting there. And then she heals him, which I loved because you could actually see the scar on his face eventually disappear too because she healed him. And when she says, I did want to take your hand, Ben's hand, it was one of those moments where I kind of tapped my buddy on the arm and I was like, here we go, Kylo's going to turn good. I've been looking forward to this moment. Rey takes off from the ship and Kylo's standing there on the edge and you hear this voice, hey kid. And the first time I heard it, I didn't recognize the voice. I was like, is this Luke showing up as a Force ghost? But it actually turns out to be Han, his father. And I was super surprised that he showed up in this movie. I loved it. It was such an awesome moment. And they essentially had the same dialogue that they had in The Force Awakens where they were standing there and Kylo saying, I know what I must do, but I don't know if I have the strength to do it. This time Han says, you do. And then Kylo takes the lightsaber and throws it out into the ocean. That whole moment, and then when he starts to tear up and say, Dad, that moment just got to me. I loved it, and I was so excited to see where they were going to go with Kylo from that time. Which then leads to where I actually teared up in this movie. And that was when Poe and Finn take the Millennium Falcon and they go back to the base where Leia is, and they find out, as well as Chewie, that Leia has died. And just that moment where Chewie just is like screaming in agony and is super upset and crying. I don't know, for me, I thought about it, and in Chewie's situation, literally all of his friends have now died. He's the only one that's still there. Luke, Leia, Han, they've all left and died, and he's the last one. I don't know, that one, it just got to me. The last thing I'll go over before we get to the ending of the movie was the part where Rey is actually on the island where she trained with Luke. I didn't see that coming. I thought, again, that she was going to head back, try and get revenge against the Emperor, and slowly turn towards the dark side with the final battle with Kylo coming. But instead, she goes back to the island where she trained with Luke, and she's burning the TIE fighter. And right when she's about to throw in her lightsaber, Force Ghost Luke shows up. And it was kind of ironic because he catches the lightsaber and he's walking back, and he says something along the lines of like, a Jedi weapon is not to be disrespected like this, or something along those lines. I can't remember exactly. Which is the complete opposite to how he acted at the beginning of The Last Jedi, when at the beginning Rey hands him a lightsaber and he just tosses it over his shoulder, which I didn't really like. And he goes through and he gives this awesome speech to her and how he knew that she was a Palpatine. Leia knew that she was a Palpatine, but she saw what was in Rey's heart and in her spirit, and she knew that she could do this, essentially. And it was just another one of those really cool moments. You see Luke lift his X-Wing out of the water from the island, which to me, I thought back to Episode 5, Empire, when he couldn't lift the ship out of the swamp, and that's where Yoda kind of shows him up and lifts it up and tells him that he doesn't believe in the Force, or he needs to strengthen his belief in the Force. That was just an awesome moment. Then we get to the final part of this movie, the ending, where they're all basically working towards this planet and trying to destroy this fleet. Let's just talk about this fleet. And gosh, guys, another annoyance for me. And I know this video has probably come across very negative, and I understand why. I liked it again, but there was just so many of these things that I felt that it just took away from the movie and the story. And another one of those was this fleet. The fleet looked cool. Just the idea of all these thousands of Star Destroyers there invading the universe or the galaxy at that time is pretty epic in and of itself. The problem is they put a Death Star on these Star Destroyers. Basically, in episodes 4 and 6, they had to have a Death Star-sized station to shoot a weapon like that to destroy a planet. Then, in episode 8, with Starkiller Base, that's an entire planet that they're using to be able to, suck the power from the sun and destroy a system. Now they've put the technology of a Death Star into each Star Destroyer, and they blow up a planet, and I hated it. How many times in these movies are we going to have something that's like a Death Star that destroys a planet? It's old. We've seen it a bunch of times. And what's the point? Why are the Sith just going to show up to every planet with a Star Destroyer and blow them all up because they won't join them? I know that was their threat. They're basically putting a gun to their head. But are they just going to eventually, blow up all the planets in the galaxy and then there's nothing left? It was so old. It was such a retread of former movies. I hated that part. The actual ships themselves were cool. Just take the Death Star stuff away from Star Wars. It's fine. There's other things you can do. Okay, that rant's over. Okay, moving on. So I know this video is getting a little long. It's obviously the longest one I've done so far, but I'm going to cut this last section up into two parts. The space battle and then the part on the planet with Emperor Palpatine, Rey, and Kylo. It's not going to line up. I'm not going to do them in order. I'm just going to talk about each portion individually and how they played out for the last section. Let's talk about the space battle first. It was pretty cool. When Poe and the rest of the fleet show up, and they're just overwhelmed by all these ships, and they're just firing at them. That part was pretty cool. I don't really have any issues with how the space battle was at the end. I thought that it was actually probably better than what happened down on the planet with the Emperor and Rey. How they were able to go through and do the invasion on the Star Destroyer with the space horses, I thought that was great. I thought how they handled Finn and BB-8 and those guys invading that Star Destroyer was awesome. It was really fun to watch. The only part of this space battle, before I get to the end, that I did not like was Poe. And I liked him in the beginning, but when he gets to the part where basically all the ships are getting shot down and it seems like they're all going to die, he gives up, which I feel goes against everything they've tried to do through The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. The Force Awakens a little bit, but The Last Jedi was just him on that ship with Leia basically trying to say, you need to be a leader. Like, you are going to be the next Leia. That's what I felt like they were trying to tell us with that movie. He needed to have more hope. He needed to stop being arrogant. He needs to stop trying to be a hero, instead try to be a leader. All these different things. And they went over that again in this, how he needs to be the one with hope. The hope that starts the fire that'll light the galaxy. That saying that he has? That's what it was leading to for him to lead this moment and for him to be basically the emotional leader for this group. And then what does he do when it finally gets to the moment where it feels like all hope is lost, they're going to lose? He gives up. I don't know. I didn't necessarily agree with him wanting to give up at that time and say that they had lost. That was basically going against everything they said he was going to become from The Last Jedi, or at least what they were hinting at from The Last Jedi through this movie. I didn't really like that part. Having said that, when Lando pops up and you hear this music, the Star Wars theme play, and all these thousands of ships show up, it was epic. I love that part. And Lando and Chewie flying in, Lando doing his laugh and starting to take out these Star Destroyers. I thought that was really cool. The last thing I'll talk about with the space battle is at the very end, once they've won and the Star Destroyer is actually crashing down towards the planet, and Poe is going to rescue Finn and this girl who shot down the bridge there. Poe's racing towards it, and he's like, don't worry, I can make it there, I'm fast. And you hear Lando pop in and say, but not as fast as this ship. And the Millennium Falcon flies in. When the Millennium Falcon theme song, or whatever that is, plays, that is my favorite music from Star Wars. And I don't know, guys, that was one of the moments in the movies where I was like, yes, this is Star Wars, this is what I love. It brought me back to my childhood watching the movies. I love the Millennium Falcon in that song, and it gave me goosebumps. Now jumping down planet side to with the Emperor and Rey, I thought that whole section of it was done well. I felt like there was a lot more that they could do with it, but overall it was okay. And what I mean by that is when Rey is actually going down and approaching the Emperor, and they're having this discussion about how all the Sith will live in her once she strikes him down, I really like that part. I've never claimed to be someone that is a lore master for Star Wars. I've never read the novels. I've only watched the movies and a couple TV shows. I've played a lot of the video games. So I don't know too much about the lore. I have a general idea for most. And see, I didn't know that about the Sith. I didn't know that if Rey killed Emperor Palpatine, she would now take over as the Empress and all of the Sith would live in her. I thought that was a pretty cool idea. And how the Emperor went through and manipulated the situation to make her more mad at him so she would eventually kill him. So she would take over as the Empress of the Sith. I thought all of that was really cool. Obviously, the Emperor is very intimidating. How the acting was done with that, how the visual effects with him was awesome. I loved it. And of course, with Daisy Ridley, she killed that scene like she did with the rest of this movie. When Kylo Ren showed up, though, and he's trying to get to Rey and the Emperor, I really liked how when he jumped in that hole and he grabbed onto that chain and you hear him go, ow. I thought that was pretty cool because you never really saw a lot of comedy from Kylo Ren in this trilogy. Obviously, he was basically the new Darth Vader in this. There wasn't really a lot of comedy. I don't know. I really like that part. But when Kylo Ren jumps down and he runs into the Knights of Ren, he doesn't have a lightsaber. He doesn't have a blaster. He doesn't have anything. The Knights of Ren, like General Hux, were some of the biggest wastes of characters in this movie and in this trilogy. They were hyped up from the very first movie, The Force Awakens, when Rey has that flashback and she sees the Jedi Temple destroyed and Kylo's there with all these hooded figures behind him. I was always expecting them to be former Jedi that Kylo Ren took with him after he destroyed the Jedi Temple. Because in The Last Jedi, Luke explains to Rey, Kylo Ren took some of my Jedi apprentices and fled. So I always figured that's who the Knights of Ren were. I don't know, they look cool, but I don't think they spoke one time during the entire trilogy. Not one time do we get a background of who they were, what they were about, nothing. They're basically just props, I felt like, in the movie to look cool. It would have been so awesome to go and figure out who they were if they were former Jedi. Or if they did turn into, maybe they're not as powerful as Kylo Ren, but they can use the Force and they've got lightsabers. And again, you could see something with Rey and maybe Finn, how he's force sensitive, that him fighting against the Knights of Ren, it was just a waste, and I hated that. I wish they would have used something more with the Knights of Ren. When Rey's about to strike down the Emperor, and then she puts the lightsaber behind her back, and then Kylo grabs it, they pass it to each other through this force connection. I feel like at that moment, they were trying to make that a very powerful scene where people were going to, yell or clap or go crazy in the movie theater. And it didn't hit. And I was bummed about that because I love going to opening night movies because I feel like that's where most of the most passionate probably fans are. And it's like a rock concert in there a lot of the times because there's so much cheering and laughing and different things like that. It's fun to go see it. It's a cool experience. There was hardly... I don't really remember anyone in the first time I went and saw this movie where they cheered when they passed the lightsaber to Kylo Ren. No one really said anything. And I felt like they were trying to do a Thor showing up in Wakanda in Infinity War or Cap catching Thor's hammer in Endgame, and it didn't deliver. And I felt like they tried to do that a couple of times with this ending, but none of that ever really happened. And again, that's another bummer for me. There wasn't really a moment in this movie where, even though there was a lot of like fist bumping, yeah, that's cool, there wasn't anything that made me lose my mind, like Endgame or Infinity War, these other movies that had really cool payoff moments. Anyway, Kylo destroys the Knights of Ren. Rey obviously doesn't kill the Emperor. Kylo shows up, and the Emperor sucks, I guess you could say, the life force from both of them with their force bond that they have. And the way his eyes turned yellow and he got this really cool black and red robe and became the Sith Lord again, I thought that was pretty epic. And then he goes through and he zaps the sky with this massive force lightning to try and take down the Resistance fleet. And again, that was another one of those moments where I was like, holy crap, how it was shot. That one where it did a really wide view of the camera and you saw the lightning shooting up out of the building and just hitting all these ships. That was another one of those powerful force moments that I've wanted to see, and it was cool. Which again, I feel like this is another one of those moments that I've talked about throughout this whole review where something really cool happens and then right afterwards something detracts from it and takes away from that. And that was after he pushes Kylo off that little cliff thing inside of the room, and then Rey stands up. We'll talk about the Force voices here in a sec. But then the Emperor stops shooting this massive bolt of lightning into the sky that's taking down hundreds, if not thousands, of ships in the sky. He then points it at Rey and tries to kill her. And it's just this little tiny, electric fingers that he had done in the previous movies. It wasn't anything new. After he had just blasted all these ships, and somehow Rey is able to block that with just one lightsaber, and then eventually again, like I said, I'll talk about the cool thing about Rey here in just a sec. But then how he's just zapping her with his electric fingers, and then she's able to turn it back around him and eventually kill him. How many times is the Emperor going to continue to zap people with his lightning fingers to then have them reflect it with a lightsaber and do damage to him? I mean, we saw it with Mace Windu in Episode 3. We saw it a little bit in Episode 6 with Darth Vader. That, again, like the Death Star cannons on the Star Destroyer ships, it was just another rehashed attempt at something that's already happened multiple times in these movies. It wasn't anything new, and it was a real big bummer. I just don't understand how he could zap the sky with that massive bolt of lightning and then shoot it at Rey. She can block it with one lightsaber, and he eventually just kills himself. And again, I don't know if there's something with the Force that she's making it so that he has to continue to shoot it back at himself. I don't know, but I didn't like it. Having said that, scooting back a little bit, how they handled Rey basically lying on the ground unconscious, and she starts saying, "Be with me," as she's crying. And you start to hear, Anakin from the prequels, both Obi-Wans from the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, Mace Windu, Luke, all these different people coming in. I thought that was epic. And I guess that there were actually voices from the TV series from Star Wars. I think it was from Clone Wars and from Rebels. They brought all of them in to do voices in that scene. And it was, Qui-Gon from Episode 1. That one was one of my favorites. It was cool going through and listening to each of those voices and trying to guess, that was from the prequels. That was from the original trilogy. I love that. But I feel like they could have taken that a step further where I would have loved, and I could be in the minority in this. You guys tell me what you think. I was sincerely hoping when I started to hear the voices, I was like, this is going to be sweet if then it pans down to her and she stands up and behind her we see all of the actors from all the Star Wars movies that we've had. We see Obi-Wan, we see Luke, we see Leia, we see Mace Windu, we see Qui-Gon. Most of those guys are still alive, except for Leia, but you can still, CGI her in there. It would kind of be, again, comparing it to Endgame, it would be like the moment where Captain America stands up and, he's like on your left and everyone shows up and the music plays. That would have been amazing if when it panned down to her, you see all of our favorite actors from all of these movies standing behind her and the Jedi theme music plays. I think that would have been much cooler than just the voices. The voices were cool, but I feel like it could have been taken to another level. After Rey kills the Emperor and they go through and they destroy the fleet and Rey passes out or basically dies, I guess, I thought that whole section with her and Kylo Ren was really cool. Again, you can see how Kylo turned from the dark side to the light side, and instead of sucking the life force out of her like what Sith do, from what I understand, the dark side of the force can suck life force out of others to kill them or weaken them, while Jedi can pass theirs to heal others. And this was another one of those moments where he has now turned to the light side of the force and he heals Rey, brings her back to life. But in doing so, sacrifices himself, giving up his life force so that she could live. That to me was a pretty cool ending. It was very similar to obviously Darth Vader, his grandfather, where he sacrificed himself in the end so that he could save someone else, which was cool, a bit of a rehash. But overall, I thought it was awesome. I wish they would have done more with Kylo Ren at the end of this movie, though. Him fighting the Knights of Ren was interesting, but after that, he really didn't do much. And maybe that was because they wanted that focus to be on Rey for the end, which I understand, but I wish they would have done more for him. After he dies, Rey obviously is up and they escape, and they go through and they do this pretty cool throwbacks to showing, planets from the original movies. We see the Ewoks. That was all cool. Anyways, guys, I really did like this movie. I know it may not seem that way because I went on a couple of tangents and ranted about a couple things I didn't like, but overall I thought it was good. The first time I saw it, I thought it was okay. Then when I saw it the second and third time, I liked it a lot more. And maybe that's just because I had already seen it and I knew what was coming and I was cool with it. But overall, I liked it. In fact, if I was to give it a score, I would probably give it a 7 out of 10. So it was good. It wasn't anything great, but I enjoyed it. Anyways, guys, that's it for this video. I know it was a little bit longer than my previous reviews, but that's just because this was a big movie. I had a lot of opinions on this, and I'm excited to see what you guys think. So please, in the comment section, leave some comments. Let me know what you liked, what you disliked. Where was I right? Where was I wrong? Did I make some mistakes? I know I did. So please point those out and let me know, because that may change how I looked at the movie. Anyways, guys, if you like this video, make sure to click the like button down beneath. And if you're not subscribed to the channel and you enjoy my content, click that subscribe button. It really helps my channel out. And if you've got some Star Wars friends out there that love watching reviews, feel free to share this with them. And yeah, thank you guys so much, and we'll talk to you next time.